Good afternoon, friends. First of all, thank you to my senior colleague, Mr. Raghav Chandra. We've had a great time in the Ministry of Agriculture, not just doing agriculture, but also doing scent of the game, and then Kali's daughter, and many other things. Mr. Khandekar, Mr. Dholakia, Mr. Christopher, friends, Mr. Tiwari, ladies and gentlemen. You see, yes, sure. So what we have is, a keynote address. When you're asked to give a keynote address, so then the keynote address has to cover something beyond the immediate text and the context of the book. And therefore, let's look at the two key words here. The first word is map, and the second word is milestone. Now, what is a map? A map is sort of tells you about what the reality is, but a map is actually a mental construct, right? And what is a milestone? It is not that you stop moving, but a milestone just tells you that this is a point where we have arrived. So you cannot actually stop moving at any point of time. It is not that you have a stop moving, but a milestone is a marker which tells you that this is where we have reached. And of course, you look at milestones in different ways. On the national highway, you look at milestones differently. Seamen look at milestones in terms of nautical miles. The aeroplanes and the pilots look at it in terms of hundreds of kilometers or thousands of kilometers. Now Gujarat and Maharashtra. Punjab is now 9 different formations. So what has happened is that over a period of time, the map of the country has changed so often, so many times, and each time the map is changed, it is not just a drawing of lines. It is not just that the Survey of India brings out a new map. It's very easy to draw a new map. But what goes behind a map is an entire discourse. Is the discourse of politics, is the discourse of assertion, is the discourse of wanting to know why things change. और अगर आप masthead देखेंगे तो पहले masthead पे लिखा रहता है India, provinces, states and districts. Because when India became independent, at that time we had 9 provinces. 2 went to Pakistan, the Sindh and the Northwest Frontier Province. They had gone to Pakistan, and Bengal and Punjab had been divided. Had become East Bengal, West Bengal, and East Punjab and West Punjab, respectively. But the point to note is that while in India, and India is the only country in the world where we've changed our map about 80 times from 1947 to 2019. When I say change in map, it also means change in the name. For instance, when Mysore called itself Karnataka, when Madras called itself Tamil Nadu, when Lakshadweep Islands called themselves Lakshadweep, when the islands of Andaman and Nicobar, they changed their names to Mount Harriet becomes Mount Manipur. So all these are changes that reflect a new nation, that reflect a new assertion of pride. Where all the Manipur heroes were kept in that place in Lakshadweep. Why should it be called, why should it not be named after those heroes of Manipur? So now that you have the place called Mount Manipur, it's a reflection of how we are changing. देखिए, दुनिया में जिन states ने, जिन nations ने अपने नक्शे नहीं बदले, या जिन states या nations ने अपने आप को नहीं बदला, वो nations ही दुनिया से उड़ गईं. USSR एक ज़माने में, it used to be one of the, it was at par with USA. It was at par with USA because आजकल it is very fashionable to run down communism and run down all these things. But there was a point of time when USSR was giving a real challenge to the US of A. USSR does not exist today. Yugoslavia does not exist today. Czechoslovakia does not exist today. Because wherever nations have not recognized the strength of its constituent parts, there we have a problem, and that problem gets affected in many ways. We in India have been able to look at these things in a very different manner. Therefore, I want you to look at the first map of India. I want you to understand that in India, it is we the people who have decided to make this country. And the second very significant statement is that we are a union of states. We are not the United States of India, but we are a union of states, which means that states, the federal polity plays a very important role in the imagination of India. तो आप देखिए कि जो पहला हमारा जो नक्शा था, जिसमें 9 प्रोविंसेस हैं और 562 छोटी रियासतें हैं। अगला नक्शा जो हमारा 1950 में आता है, लेट्स मूव ऑन टू द नेक्स्ट मैप। द नेक्स्ट मैप ऑफ इंडिया दैट यू फाइंड, इसके अंदर यू फाइंड दैट इंडिया इज मोर और लेस recognizable, because the earlier map you had large swaths of land, large swaths of territory, which were the princely states. And today we must place on record that 48% of India's area was under the princely states, and 10 crore was the population under the princely states. और princely states जो थी हमारी, इनमें 3 जो prominent जिन्होंने अपना नाम को जो retain कर पाए, जम्मू कश्मीर, हैदराबाद and Mysore, these were 21 gun salute states. अंग्रेज़ों के बड़े अच्छे तरीके थे हमको कंफ्यूज करने के लिए, और आजकल मतलब हर सरकार ये करती रहती है। तो अंग्रेज़ had a very interesting method of doing it. They would assign salutes, they would assign gun salutes to states. So Hyderabad had 21 gun salutes, and Bhopal incidentally had 19. The state where I come from, Kapurthala, that had only 15. So, and then they would add personal ranks. So for instance, they would say that Kapurthala is a 15-gun salute, but the personal rank of the Maharaja is another 2 guns, and the local salute is 19 guns. So that way, the Britishers kept everyone happy, or, everybody going along that line. But I must tell you that in this map that you see, the second map of India, there were, only 3 of the old states have remained. That is Jammu Kashmir abhi bhi hai, Hyderabad abhi bhi hai, or Mysore abhi bhi hai. Inki jo, they will change in 1956. I must tell you here that Hyderabad was the prima donna state in India, because the Nizam of Hyderabad was called His Exalted Highness. All the other highnesses were highnesses, but the highness of Nizam, he was called His Exalted Highness. Ab usko His Exalted Highness kyun kaha gaya? There were 2 reasons. First was that he made a very big donation. He was a very rich man. Time had, at that point of time, classified him as one of the richest persons in the world. Though, of course, I'm sure Dholakia ji will beat him today. But at that point of time, he had more Jews than what Mr. Dholakia had. So we hope that. But second was that the British Empire needed a firman to mobilize the Muslim troops against the Khalifa. And there was nobody willing to issue that firman. So the Nizam was told that if you issue this firman, we will create you as above all the highnesses in this country. And that is how the Nizam of Hyderabad became His Exalted Highness, whereas all the other highnesses, including the Nawab of Bhopal or the Begum of Nepal, were just highnesses. He became His Exalted Highness. Incidentally, I must mention here that for all the talk about partition and things, there were 2 people whom Muhammad Ali Jinnah hated the most. One was the Nizam of Hyderabad, and the second was Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah. He hated the Nizam of Hyderabad because the Nizam of Hyderabad could have challenged his position as the sole spokesman of Muslims in this country. And the other, and Nizam came from the feudal tradition. From the democratic tradition, the person who really Jinnah feared was Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah, because whatever history may have shaped later on, the fact is that in the Tripuri session of the Congress, Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah was projected as a leader of the All India States People's Congress, to which the Praja Mandal of Bhopal was also included, to which Shankar Dayal Sharma and all these people were affiliated to at that point of time. But what you notice here is that the map becomes more recognizable at this point of time. We have a shortage of time, so we'll move on. But in this map, we say states. We are no longer using the word provinces. Provinces were with British India, states are with the Bharat Sarkar or with Bharat. I would mention here that, the 4 people who led the freedom movement and had very different views. For instance, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, and B.R. Ambedkar. All of them were great patriots, but all of them had a very different conception of how India has to be run. But all of them were agreed on the point that India must be reorganized on linguistic lines. So the reorganization of the country had to take place, but immediately after partition, there was such a lot of violence in Punjab that it was put on the back burner. So now we move on to the map of 1952. 1952 का जो नक्शा है, ये भारत का पहला नक्शा है जो हिंदी में है. पहली बार भारत का नक्शा हिंदी में बना, और जब हिंदी में बना तो इसमें नाम चेंज हुए. जैसे बॉम्बे को मुंबई कहा गया, लैकेडीव, एमएनडीवी और मिनिको आइलैंड्स को लक्षद्वीप कहा गया. तो नामों का जो हिंदीकरण है वो इस मैप से हमें नज़र आता है। लेकिन इस मैप की जो सबसे बड़ी सिग्निफिकेंस है वो ये है कि आप ऊपर देखेंगे कि वो शब्द चीन आ जाता है भारत के नक्शे पे। इससे पहले जितने नक्शे भारत में बने उसमें कभी चाइना का रेफरेंस नहीं था। ब्रिटिश इंडिया ने कभी भी चाइना को भारत का नेबर नहीं माना था, लेकिन पहली बार 1952 में हमने चाइना को अपने नक्शे में डाला। देखिए, एक नक्शा सिर्फ हमें अपने बारे में नहीं बताता है, नक्शा हमें ये भी बताता है कि हम अपने नेबर्स के बारे में, उनके बारे में हम क्या सोचते हैं, क्योंकि हमारा नक्शा और पाकिस्तान का नक्शा और चाइना का नक्शा इस रीजन के बारे में अलग अलग आपको कॉन्सेप्ट्स देगा। बट दिस इज द फर्स्ट टाइम दैट वी इंट्रोड्यूस द वर्ड चीन टू द इमेजिनेशन ऑफ इंडिया। और जैसे मैं आपको अगले नक्शों में दिखाऊंगा, कुछ सालों बाद तिब्बत हमारे नक्शे से उड़ जाता है और 52 से लेके 59 तक तिब्बत हमारे मैप से ही गायब हो जाता है। और फिर बाद में जब इंडिया का रिलेशन चाइना के साथ जब गड़बड़ हो जाती है तो देन वी अगेन गेट बैक China, get back Tibet, but as a part of China. I must tell you here that, the government of Tibet refused to recognize India because उन्होंने कहा कि हम मैकमोहन लाइन को तो मानते हैं, लेकिन उसके नीचे जो सिक्किम है, दार्जिलिंग है, कालिम्पोंग है और तवांग है, ये तिब्बत का हिस्सा है। इसलिए जब तक आप इसको तिब्बत में रिफ्लेक्ट नहीं करेंगे, हम आपको रिकग्नाइज नहीं करेंगे। तो इंडिया ने कहा ठीक है, आप हमको नहीं करते तो हम भी आपको रिकग्नाइज नहीं करते। सो इन द फर्स्ट फ्यू ईयर्स द रिलेशनशिप ऑफ द इंडियन गवर्नमेंट विद चाउ एन लाई एंड माओ जेडोंग was better than our relationship with the Dalai Lama's regime. So these are all historical facts which must be known, because it is very important to know what history is. Whatever we might interpret it, facts have to be accepted as they are. चलिए अब अगले मैप पे चलते हैं. Let's move on to the next map. Now this is the map of India, in which you see it's not very clear, but क्या हुआ कि 53 में the linguistic agitation in Andhra Pradesh started and Potti Sriramalu died. When Potti Sriramalu died in Andhra, then at that point of time, I mean, hell broke loose, and it was decided that yes, we will not only recognize Andhra state, but we will set up a states reorganization committee to look into the entire gamut of how these states have been organized. And उसमें Justice Fazil Ali, H.N. Kunzru, or Mr. K.M. Panikkar, these three people were made the members of this SRC. Or SRC traveled throughout the country. They would receive memoranda, 1.5 lakh memoranda इस स्टेट्स रिऑर्गेनाइजेशन कमीशन को मिला कि देश का नक्शा ऐसा होना चाहिए, पंजाब ऐसा होना चाहिए, हरियाणा ऐसा होना चाहिए, हिमाचल ऐसा होना चाहिए, तमिलनाडु कैसा होना चाहिए। तो इस कमेटी ने 1.5 साल देश को घूमा, 1.5 लाख मेमोरेंडा इनके पास आया, एंड देन दे ब्रॉट आउट अ 267 पेज रिपोर्ट विच मोर और लेस एक्सेप्टेड द फैक्ट कि जो हमारी ये जो नक्शा, लेट्स मूव ऑन टू द नेक्स्ट मैप एक्चुअली, बट दिस इज द मैप विच वाज शोइंग यू द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ऑफ दीज थिंग्स। I think मैं इसको मैप्स को छोड़ देता हूँ because they're not as clear as I thought they would be. तो हम कहानी पे चलते हैं। तो क्या हुआ कि 56 में जो ये southern states थी, 4 southern states, they were created. Dr. Ambedkar in fact said that this has led to in a way it's a mini balkanization because south has been created into 4 states, but ऊपर वाला जो हिस्सा है Hindi speaking states, they have been left very very big. Now the reason why the SRC did not agree on the reorganization of Bombay or the reorganization of Punjab or the reorganization of Assam and Bengal was that in those days the defense of the first line of defense was the state armed police. BSF had not been created till 1965, and the SRC felt that unless you have a very compact state which has the administrative ability and the financial competence to manage the boundaries, to manage the international borders, it will be very difficult, and that is why it did not happen. But what happened was that by 1960, such was the agitation in Gujarat and Maharashtra, the Gujarati speaking and the Marathi speaking people, that they wanted that it should be done. I mean, it should be. Now the point, that one of the conclusions of my, not conclusions, no, there are no conclusions in history, there are only suggestions in history because conclusions change every few years. So one of the things that comes is that whatever the national political party might say, on the ground, people will go by the sentiment. On the ground, people will go by what the people want. Because उस समय कांग्रेस, CPI और जनसंघ, जो 3 prominent parties थी उस समय देश की, none of them wanted the division of Bombay. They wanted a composite Bombay. But such was the sentiment on ground that people broke ranks with their party and they created, these states. अब क्योंकि सिर्फ 10 मिनट बचे हैं तो we'll have to pick up speed. तो इसके बाद में 60 के बाद में जो दूसरा इम्पोर्टेंट मैप जो आता है वो 61 का है, जब गोवा इंडिया का पार्ट बना. क्योंकि उससे पहले तक क्या था कि पुर्तगाल और फ्रांस के साथ कुछ हमारी टेरिटरीज उनके पास थी, और जो सबसे पहला भारत का समझौता हुआ था वो फ्रांस के साथ हुआ था. 15 अगस्त को देश आज़ाद हुआ और 28 अगस्त को हमारा फ्रांस के साथ ये असेसमेंट हुई, ये एग्रीमेंट हुआ दैट ऑल द फ्रेंच टेरिटरीज विल बी हैंडेड ओवर टू इंडिया very smoothly. But that was not the case with Portugal. With Portugal, we had a tough time getting those areas back, and we actually had to do military intervention. And that military intervention took place because बहुत लोग कहते थे, why couldn't the army have moved in earlier? The army couldn't have moved in earlier because still the Berlin Wall was created in 1961. NATO had given the impression that NATO countries will come to assist each other for anywhere in the world. So this, once this clarification was given, this matter was sorted out. 63, Nagaland was made. Now, I have said Nagaland is a very important point, that when Nagaland was made, we set aside the recommendations of the SRC that a state must be viable. So, Nagaland was the first instance where it was agreed that in order to resolve ethnic and linguistic conflicts in the country, we can have a small state. So, but when Nagaland is made, then the making of Mizoram, the making of Meghalaya, the making of Manipur, the making of Tripura, the making of Arunachal, it is inbuilt into this, because once you have accepted principle A, then that same principle will have to be followed. Now, on 1st December 1965, BSF was created. And when BSF was created, the argument that had been given that Punjab cannot be reorganized into Punjab, Haryana and Himachal, that argument fell across because the defense of the borders was to be done by the BSF. So a lot of people think that Punjab happened because Sant Fateh Singh and Master Tara Singh went on hunger strike. I mean, the real reason is elsewhere. So sometimes what happens is that in history, a lot of times, a lot of people get credit for things which would have happened automatically. You know, sometimes you get credit for things that you have not done. Sometimes you do not get credit for things which have been done. It all depends on who the historian was who wrote history. Anyway, so now I think, so I'll cut out a lot of other maps because Himachal ban gaya, but Himachal had to be made. You know, all these things had to be done. Now I come to 1975, when Sikkim became a part of India. Remember that Article 3 of our Samvidhan कहता है कि हम 1 इंच टेरिटरी ना छोड़ सकते हैं, ना 1 इंच टेरिटरी हम ले सकते हैं. तो सिक्किम को भारत का हिस्सा बनाने के लिए 35th और 36th कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट करना पड़ा. अब बड़ा सवाल आता है कि सिक्किम भारत का पार्ट क्यों बना, क्या हमने उसको एनेक्स किया. फैक्ट है कि 1947 में द मेजॉरिटी पॉपुलेशन ऑफ सिक्किम वाज नॉट लेप्चा और भूटिया बट वर नेपालीज, बिकॉज इन द 1870s the Nepalese had been invited to cultivate the lands around the monasteries, and over a period of time the Nepalese population grew, and when that population grew, it was but natural that they would ask for democratic rights. Chogyal was not giving them the democratic rights, and that's how it became a part of India. So that is how this happened. I must tell you here, you must have heard about the 3 Bigha corridor. I'll narrate the story because I was ADM in Kuch Bihar when this happened. We could not link the 2 corridors of Dahagram and Ongrapota because somebody went to court and said that India cannot even give 3 bighas of land to Bangladesh. Still there is a constitutional amendment, and that till there's an agreement, and that happened in LBS. So what had happened from 1992 to 2014, India had technically leased 3 bighas of land to Bangladesh at rupee 1 per year for 999 years. And this amount had been, the President of India had said, all right, I'll waive it off. So that is how if you want, again the point is that if you want to solve a thing, there's always a solution. If you don't want to solve a thing, you can always say this cannot be done, this cannot be done. Anyway, to cut a long story short, this happened in, well, I hope you liked it. I hope it's not that you want me to get away from here. Okay, thank you. Because sometimes लोग इसलिए ताली बजा देते हैं कि अब आप जाइए. तो but मेरे पास अभी 2-3 मिनट हैं, तो मैं उसका पूरा सदुपयोग करूँगा. उसके बाद जो अगला ग्रेट चेंज आता है हमारे नक्शों पे, that happens in 2000 when 3 states are made. Chhattisgarh, Uttarakhand and Jharkhand. Now, by this time, what has happened is that the opposition to a small state, that has disappeared. So both the Congress and the BJP are taking credit कि हमने बनाया, हमने बनाया, हमने बनाया. अब उत्तराखंड में कांग्रेस क्लेम करती कि हमने उत्तराखंड बनवाया, बीजेपी क्लेम करती कि हमने बनवाया, likewise in Madhya Pradesh and Bihar. So the whole notion of, that whole thing that if you are breaking a state that is going against the country, that went. And there was a bipartisan consensus on this. In fact, the other thing which I want to share with all of us here is that actually whatever the political parties might say on the election stage, the fact is that all our political parties have collaborated on several occasions. Of the 105 constitutional amendments in the country, about 95% of them have been passed unanimously. There's a lot of debate and things. Anyway, so now we come to Telangana. Because Telangana, when it was created in 2014, that is Telangana or Andhra Pradesh version 4.0, because that is the fourth reorganization of the Andhra state, which also now brings us to the principle that even a non-Hindi speaking state, a language which is not Hindi, can also have two states. And the last reorganization, of course, as you know, is 2019, when जम्मू कश्मीर का पहला नाम जो था, जो नाम जो उन्होंने अपने आप को दिया था, वो था जम्मू व कश्मीर व लद्दाख व तिब्बत हा. So Jammu Kashmir's imagination was that Jammu Kashmir is actually 4 constituent units. Now, and this has now become the Ladakh and Jammu Kashmir. Incidentally, it must be mentioned that in 1948, the Ladakh Buddhist Association had said, कि आप हमको Lahore, Spiti, Punjab, Teri Garhwal, Pauri Garhwal, iska part bana do, and why don't you make a large ethnic Buddhist sort of a community on the borders of Tibet. So that didn't happen because by that time it had gone into various things. One more thing I want to share with you, a little known story is that in 1954, Bihar and Bengal wanted to merge. The Chief Minister of Bihar, Shri Krishna Sinha, and Dr. B.C. Roy, both the assemblies passed a resolution that it should be one united state. Because there was a major problem of rehabilitation of Bengali refugees, because unlike the refugees of Punjab and Sindh, who were settled very comfortably, I mean, I wouldn't say comfortably, but the settlement was okay because they could come and settle in one area. Whereas the Bengali refugees, unfortunately, some were sent to Andaman, some were sent to Dandakaranya, some were sent to Pilibhit in UP, some were sent to Odisha. So unki bahut mushkil thi. So Dr. B.C. Roy felt that they can all be rehabilitated in this now very large area which is Jharkhand. But the opposition did not come. Opposition, one would have thought, would come from the Communist Party, various other things. The opposition came from the congressmen of UP. Because they felt कि अगर ये state बन गई तो ये UP से भी बड़ी होगी. और अगर ये UP से बड़ी हो गई तो फिर जो UP का permanent hegemony है, permanent वर्चस्व है भारत की राजनीति पे, वो शायद खत्म हो जाए. But that's another story, and if I tell you everything, then maybe you will not read my book. So अब ऐसा है, अगर आप किताब खरीद भी लेंगे तो उसके बाद पॉसिबिलिटी कि आप उसको पूरा पढ़ेंगे वो संभावना कम है, बिकॉज मुझे पता है कि लोगों के पास कितना कम समय है. इसलिए मैं आपको अब मैं क्लोज कर रहा हूँ. आई विल जस्ट रीड टू यू माय असेसमेंट और व्हाट आई वुड से कंक्लूजन, बिकॉज यू कांट कंक्लूड एनीथिंग इन हिस्ट्री, because new facts come up and new facts surface, and when new facts come, just half a minute, my friend. Very scared. Are there any lessons from this study? Yes. The first is that the notion of identity is fluid, and I say it with all seriousness. Fluid means that the identity is not cast in stone, and the identity is not all gas. Till Uttarakhand was made, people were Kumaunis and Khadwalis and Udham Singh Nagarwalas. Now they become Uttarakhandis. I was a Punjabi till I settled in Uttarakhand. My children may not identify themselves as Punjabis. But at no stretch of imagination can they identify themselves as Tamilians or Telugus or somebody else. So identity is fluid. And the more we recognize the fluidity of identities and accept many or multiple identities, the better it is for us. Because we are very fortunate that our national anthem also says, Punjab, Sindh, Gujarat, Maratha, Dravid, Udkal, Banga. Very few national anthems in the world have a situation where many nationalities, many languages are celebrated. And let me also take you back. The very first slok in the Bhagavad Gita starts when Dhritarashtra is asking Sanjay and telling him, tell me Sanjay, which are the armies on the Kaurava side and which are the armies on the Pandava side. Which also means that even at that point of time in the concept of Bharat and Mahabharat, you were accepting that there will be the Kosal Raj, there will be the Kashi Raj, there will be the Malya Raj, there will be the Chola Raj. Second point, languages have normally united people, but scripts can divide people. As it happened in the case of Punjab, whether you write Punjabi in Devanagari or Gurmukhi or Shamukhi has been a major course of thing. Third, political parties change their perspective over time. There's nothing wrong about it. But to think that parties will always have the same viewpoint is wrong. Parties will change their opinions over time, and that is something good. Those political parties which refuse to change the time will get into the dockyards of history. Fourth, migration affects demography, and demography affects politics. And therefore, politics will always be concerned about demographic changes, whether it is the movement from the rural to the urban, whether it is the movement from Bihar to Punjab, because the fact is that in the next 2 censuses, Sikhs will not be in a majority in Punjab. It will not be in a majority in Punjab, and that will change the politics of Punjab. The hill people will no longer be a majority in Uttarakhand, and that will change the politics of Uttarakhand. But these are all things which, as mature democracies, we've got to understand and anticipate. Fifth, there's a big gap between national political leadership of a party may want and what ground level workers would do. The opposition to an idea can come from the most unexpected quarters. Seventh, the English press, the Hindi press, and the regional press will give you different perspectives. What the English press will say will be very different from what the Hindi press will say. And let me tell you that the combined circulation of Times of India, which is the largest paper, is much less than the circulation of Dainik Jagran and Bhaskar and Amar Ujala. So for all that we might think of how great Times of India is, the fact is that Dainik Bhaskar sells more copies, and I'm glad that Dainik Bhaskar is also supporting us here. Okay. Ninth, 7 decades is a long time in the story of an individual. I've completed 6 decades. But for a nation, 6 decades is nothing. Nations would count their history in terms of centuries, but civilizations will count their tenure in millennia. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
यकीन मानिए मेरा बिल्कुल भी मन नहीं था ये प्रेजेंटेशन रोकने का वक्त की नज़ाकत है इसलिए यहाँ पे काफ़ी स्कूल के बच्चे भी बैठे हैं। मुझे यकीन है चोपड़ा जी को सुनने के बाद कि अगर इतने बेहतरीन तरीके से कोई हमें हिस्ट्री पढ़ाता तो हम दिन भर हिस्ट्री पढ़ते ही रहते, राइट? तो ज़ोरदार तालियां होनी चाहिए। थैंक यू सो मच फॉर दैट वंडरफुल प्रेजेंटेशन सर, एंड आई वुड नाउ लाइक टू invite on stage Mr. Abhilash Khandikar ji. Chandra ji already hai. I would request them to please come forward and present a memento to our speaker as a token of love, respect and gratitude. And of course, as you have already seen, it is the mascot of the Bhopal Literature and Arts Festival 2023. Zordar taali honi chahiye ek baar for that wonderful presentation by Dr. Sanjeev Chopra ji. We are delighted, we have been delighted to have him and listen from him. Thank you so much, gentlemen.